Hey guys, Terk here. Hope you're having a good one. Sorry for the lack of videos these past couple weeks, but after a 2-year-long pandemic, man, it's finally time that I took myself and my family out to sunny Florida in order to enjoy some nice, well-earned time off. But as I was sitting on the beach and enjoying some White Claws, I definitely didn't forget about you guys. And as I cracked open another claw, I started to get to thinking, and now I don't want to get all philosophical and introspective about my personal life with you guys, but I was more curious as to where I am as a gamer. Here on our channel, we've talked about all sorts of different topics. We've covered CPU reviews, GPU reviews, and even motherboard reviews, and we've talked about technologies like 4K gaming, ray tracing, upscaling technology, and we've even had the discussion on if 30 FPS gaming still has a place here in 2022. But as I was sitting on the beach, I wanted to take it down another level and get a little more fundamental. And what came up was talking about resolution. And sure enough, as I was cruising through my Twitter timeline, there was an article that I just couldn't pass up. Today, I wanted to focus on an ongoing survey that's been performed by a news outlet called 3dsinners.org. If you're not familiar with them, they've been around for a long time and they cover all sorts of topics on the graphic processor unit. They cover GPU tier lists, performance analysis, as well as some market insight when it comes to all the different accelerators from AMD, Intel, Nvidia, and other contenders in the market. Now, of course, it is an international news outlet, so if you want to check out some of their articles, make sure you're using Google Chrome or an appropriate plugin that's going to be able to auto-translate it to you. Each year, 3dsinners.org sends out a survey to their readers asking them what kind of resolution that they like to game on. Now, I like their survey primarily because they actually try to guide their respondents in the different categories they can respond to. As you know, we've got many different gamers that are in the PC gaming space, and we like to segment it out as like the mainstream gamer, a mid-range gamer, and of course the high-end gamer. And as we go through the years, it's really important to keep in mind the different types of graphics cards that fit into those different categories. By doing so, 3dsinners.org is able to kind of collate the data and do more of a meta-analysis when it comes to their readers in all the different types of aspects. Now, of course, I do consider this survey to be severely flawed, mainly because you have to know of this outlet in order to respond to it, and it is located in a country that is not English, so it's going to be skewed one way or the other. Now, on the good side, though, they do get anywhere between 1,500 and 35 respondents for their entire survey, so it is a pretty sizable sample size in order to come to some relatively decent conclusions. However, I do consider this source to be pretty reliable, at least from a user standpoint that is interested in PC gaming. So with all that in mind, let's hop into our time machines and take a journey through the past decade of PC gaming and see just where gamers have been landing when it comes to resolutions. Starting us off, we're going all the way back to 2010, and we had some really prominent games hitting the market. But when it comes to computer hardware releases, man, this was a long time ago. Intel's Core i5 series only had 3 digits in its name with the very popular 750. And if you wanted a 580 graphics card at that time, you weren't looking for an RX 580, you were in fact getting Nvidia's GTX 580. And given these relics of hardware, and when we look at the data from 3dsinners.org, it's no surprise that 1080p was considered a very high-end luxury, with many gamers sporting 720p or even 900p monitors along the way. Most mainstream and mid-range gamers were doing just fine with these HD resolutions. As for high-end setups, we still did see a good mix of some of the lower resolutions, but 1080p was definitely the high end of the spectrum, with very few people going anywhere above full HD. But as we fast forward by a short 3 years up to 2013, we're starting to see some huge shifts across the gaming industry. We're seeing some titans being released like BioShock Infinite, and Tomb Raider is getting a much needed reboot, but we're also seeing some new MMOs hit the stage, especially Final Fantasy XIV with their Realm Reborn release. If you were buying a graphics card in 2013, you were looking towards the GTX 770 or AMD's quite popular R9 280X. They were topping the charts with their holiday buying guides, and with this much graphical horsepower, the rise of 1080p gaming is here to stay. Mainstream gamers are starting to chuck their old flat panels into the garbage bin in favor of those shiny new full HD resolutions. In fact, even mid-range and high-end segments begin to embrace the additional resolution, while likely enjoying the standard PC Master Race, higher frame rates, and detail settings. And with the short turn of the crank into 2014, we're starting to see some new classics beginning to emerge. Dark Souls 2 hits the scene and continues to bust our balls, while we do see a cult favorite in Titanfall landing in the scene. And speaking of benchmarking, we are starting to see some true powerhouses when it comes to CPU and GPU releases. Intel releases their 4000 series CPUs, and we get the mighty GTX 900 series. 1080p gaming continues to dominate the landscape, with HD resolutions like 1050 or 720p. They're starting to become a relic of the past, and sure enough, 1440p is starting to creep up in the high end. But with a short 2-year jump into 2016, we are blessed with some staples of our current era of gaming. And sure enough, the GTX 1000 series comes to the scene, and it becomes the reigning champion in both value as well as performance. With this variety of games finally starting to hit the market, we're seeing some divergence when it comes to the graphical requirements. Witcher 3 kind of highlights the need for extreme graphics horsepower for improved fidelity, and Overwatch and Doom require fast-paced gameplay and high frame rates in order to have the best gaming experience. So as we go into this chart, we do start to see a massive split in the high-end space, with a nearly perfect split between 1080p and 1440p. Taking a look at the mid-range space, we also see nearly 1 in 4 gamers favoring the increased resolution with 1440p, though 1080p is still clearly the champion in that respect. Mainstream gamers continue to stay at 1080p thanks in part to the longevity of the 900 series GPUs. And as we go into 2017, we start to see some new innovations in the gaming industry. Indie gaming is starting to see a resurgence with the popular release of Cuphead, and battle royales start to begin their dominance with PUBG. On the GPU front, we are seeing some strong performance from the GTX 1000 series, and AMD's 400 and 500 series are popular go-tos for value gamers. So with graphics cards starting to settle down just a little bit, AMD can finally get their Ryzen processors kicking into gear. 1440p finally takes over on the high-end gaming space, and it picks up some ground within the mid-range. Surprisingly, the amount of gamers embracing 4K actually matches the amount of 1080p gamers on the high end. And if we look at all users here, 1080p finally has lost its edge and no longer holds the majority of the market. Fast forwarding another 2 years, and we are in pre-pandemic 2019, and we see some pretty popular franchises receiving some updates to both their gaming mechanics and their visual quality. Red Dead Redemption 2 amps up Rockstar's visual approach, and Apex Legends feeds off of Titanfall's mechanics and throws that into the Battle Royale arena. And Remedy's Control starts to hit the scene and introduces to the masses some new graphical technologies like ray tracing and deep learning supersampling. On the hardware front, things are starting to stabilize, and the go-to mid-range variety is the 5700 XT and the Ryzen 3000 series processors. For many builders that are not willing to dive into Intel's rehashed 10th gen processors and not wanting to fork over the cash for Nvidia's RTX branded hardware. On the resolution front, 1440p now leads the way in both mid-range and high-end segments, as well as the overall adoption. Nearly 1 in 3 high-end users is gaming at 4K resolutions. But as for the mainstream gamer, 1080p is still alive and well, thanks in part to many generations of hardware and games that play well with the various settings and refresh rates. Now we're getting into more present day, and we're fresh off the heels of 2021, and we're starting to live the aftermath of many of the supply shortages and delays, but we are still seeing progress across the industry. Feeding off the hardware release chaos of 2020, 2021 is a little more stable, and we get presented with the 12th gen Intel launches, though many in the community are still waiting for prices to stabilize. As for the gaming segments, mainstream gaming is starting to see the fall of 1080p in favor of QHD, and even some users are starting to adopt 4K displays, thanks in part to upscaling technologies and modern consoles' capabilities. As for the mid and high end, 1440p now holds most gamers happy, though high-end gamers are continuing to embrace and adopt the massive increase in pixels with 4K UHD. It's crazy to think just how far we've come from 2010 all the way to 2021 when it comes to all the different gaming segments. Now, I consider myself a mid-range gamer, and I find it shocking that a lot of the data we've seen actually tracks my hardware progression pretty well. But what about all the other different segments? If you're a mainstream gamer, have you been lining up with things over time, or how about on the high end? Well, let's take a broader look and look at it all in context. Mainstream gaming has embraced 1080p ever since 2012 or so, and to this day, it still remains the favorite resolution. However, for mainstream gamers, it does look like right around 2017, we see the peak popularity of 1080p resolution. In that same time frame, 1440p has begun to slowly pick up some steam, and as of 2021, 1 in 3 mainstream gamers enjoys the QHD standard. 4K, it still appears to not have caught enough traction within the mainstream audience, probably due to the sheer cost of monitors as well as the hardware required to drive the drastic increase in pixels. Mid-range gamers, though, have seen a very similar trend as mainstream, but they see their transition from 1080p back in 2014. After that, there's a rapid growth of 1440p as it comes to outpace 1080p at 2-to-1 as of 2021. 4K has gained a bit of traction here, though it still remains sort of flat comparing 2019 to 2021, with gamers like myself favoring the higher frame rates at 1440p instead of the increased resolution with 4K. High-end gamers are gonna high-end, and they love to bleed money, and sure enough, peak 1080p was back in 2013 when mainstream and mid-range gamers were finally starting to find their stride at that resolution. However, it does look like 1440p has seen a bit of a peak in the past few years for the high-end. And as high-end gamers continue to adopt 4K as their go-to gaming resolution, we are seeing some, slow but steady growth, with between 3 to 7% improvements year over year. Considering all the respondents to all of the different surveys we've seen today, 1080p has been the dominant resolution throughout the mid-2010s and remains popular today. But 4K now nearly matches the popularity of 1080p, even if its adoption is slower than the previous king of resolutions. But what I find fascinating and resonates a lot with the reviews we do here on the channel, but 1440p appears to be the sweet spot when it comes to gaming, thanks in part to 2 to 3 generations of GPU hardware from various vendors still providing excellent values to customers. Now, I know a lot of you guys watching are probably thinking to yourself, Terk, none of this can be right. I'm still gaming on a 1080p monitor. And before you guys go down into the comments and say, why don't you take a look at the Steam hardware surveys? Well, I've already done just that. Thanks to the Internet Archives for the Steam hardware results, I went back to the same time periods as we saw with the previous data and parsed out all the relevant data. Now, taking a look at this chart, clearly 1080p is still an insanely popular resolution. But what on earth is sub 1080p gaming even doing here? Nearly a quarter of the Steam hardware results report sub 1080p resolutions like 1680 by 1050 or even 720p. Clearly, I've got to be missing something here, right? One thing to keep in mind though with these Steam results is they include everything that has Steam installed and has submitted their results to the survey. This would include laptops, mini PCs, and PCs from all over the world. I wouldn't expect each country's responses to line up perfectly with the enthusiast market. And given just how well this kind of data reflects my own journey as well as the realities that are coming from all the different gaming segments, I've got a few opinions that I want to throw at you and see what you guys think. Now, as we gear up for this month's current CPU release with the 5800X3D launching I think April 20th, as well as Intel's 13th gen well on the way at the end of this year, it got me thinking if we're actually becoming a little bit redundant when it comes to our CPU reviews, at least from a gaming perspective. CPU performance impacts 1080p gameplay for the most part, and as we see with 3D Center's data, most enthusiasts either upgrading or building a new rig, we are favoring 1440p as our ideal resolution. Even if 1080p is the target resolution, as we'll see in a spoiler for my X3D review, the processor upgrade's impact on resolution, it only degrades as less capable GPUs are selected. Meaning if you're not going to be going with the high-end RTX 3080 and going for more of a RTX 3060 Ti or even a 6600 XT, getting a newer, faster processor might not see as much performance improvement as you were expecting. And if upgrading your CPU was pointless than ever, GPU upgrades are becoming a little bit less significant on the mid-range and the high-end. If you're already comfortably gaming on a 1440p monitor, upgrading to the next generation GPU that is similarly priced, it's just not going to be a complete game changer. And with the increased cost, limited availability, and the rumored drastic increases in power consumption, is driving these extra pixels worth the upgrade? Many mid-range gamers from this 3dcenter.org survey feel exactly the same way. We see 4K starting to hit a plateau, and I imagine that mid-range gaming will continue to stay flat with 4K, at least within the next GPU generation. As for marketing teams continuing to hype up 4K gaming, ray tracing, high frame rates, and all that good stuff, unless you're willing to fork over the additional $1,000 for that privilege, I don't see there being a lot of exponential growth when it comes to the high end, at least from a 4K gaming experience, and I definitely see it to start leveling off for at least 1 to 2 GPU generations. And that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through time when it comes to our resolution choices, and I hope it helps inform your perspective of where you're at in your own journey. Now, as for the channel, we've got a bunch of stuff coming up on the channel. That Linux versus Windows review, it was going to come out today, but I hit some technical difficulties, but I'm not going to let you guys down. I went ahead and picked up a 1X player, and we're going to do this review justice. So expect a lot more content from this little handheld in the future. And we've also got the 5800X3D review coming out in due time. But of course, I need the embargo date so I don't step on anyone's toes. But thank you guys again for watching the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Take care, Terk Force.